The blue glow of the departure board at San Diego International Airport reflected off the glass terminal windows, casting fractured shadows across the floor. At 70, my eyes are still sharp enough to catch the fine print, even if the world assumes an old woman like me is only good for knitting sweaters in the corner. My name is Eleanor Vance. For over 30 years, I worked as a chief forensic financial auditor. I spent my career hunting down ghosts in balance sheets, unraveling offshore accounts, and exposing the quiet greed of people who thought they were too smart to get caught. I know the exact look of panic on a guilty man's face when the ledger doesn't balance. And right now, standing at the boarding gate, the ledger in front of me was screaming red. A few yards ahead, near priority boarding, were my son, Nathan, and his wife, Paige. Nathan is 42, carrying the restless slump of a man whose ambitions outpaced his talents. Paige, 39, stood beside him with the rigid efficiency of someone managing medical records. 8 months prior, when Nathan lost his job and claimed financial ruin, I opened my home to them. They moved into the guest wing, bringing unspoken tension and a quiet entitlement without paying rent or contributing to groceries. Then came the miracle. 2 days ago, they handed me a gift box containing a fully paid 7-day vacation package to Honolulu. First-class flights, luxury resort, everything covered. Nathan called it a token of their deepest gratitude. Paige beamed, telling me I desperately needed tropical sunshine. It was the kind of theatrical, filial piety that instantly set off every alarm bell in my nervous system. Generosity from people who owe you back rent is never a gift. It is an investment. I stepped up to the boarding counter, holding my leather passport wallet. The gate agent, an observant woman named Renata, wearing a supervisor badge, took my ticket. She didn't scan it right away. Instead, her fingers hovered over the keyboard and she glanced up, locking eyes with me. Without breaking eye contact, Renata leaned over the counter and lowered her voice to a near-silent whisper, cutting cleanly through the terminal noise. "Mrs. Vance, fake a medical emergency or a faint right now and get away from this gate immediately. Do not step foot on that airplane with them." My heart didn't race. Decades of staring down white-collar criminals taught me how to keep my pulse steady when the floor dropped out. Without a sound, I shifted my gaze slightly downward. On the edge of Renata's computer screen, partially angled toward me, was the airline reservation system interface. My PNR code was highlighted in amber. Someone had covertly split my ticket from their booking group and manually injected a fraudulent medical restriction flag directly into the database, a ghost in the machine. Someone wanted me on that plane, or specifically, someone needed me to disappear on that flight under specific administrative circumstances. I didn't blink. I didn't ask questions. You gather intelligence first, process it second, and survive always. I looked back at Nathan and Paige, who were watching me expectantly from the jet bridge entrance. Then I let out a sharp breath, brought a trembling hand to my chest, and let my knees buckle, collapsing gracefully against the molded plastic seating before sliding onto the floor. Chaos instantly erupted. A nearby airport security officer shouted into his radio. Within seconds, 2 paramedics with an emergency kit were kneeling beside me. Through the narrow gap of my half-closed eyelids, I didn't look at the paramedics. I looked past them, straight at Nathan and Paige. Their reaction was a masterclass in psychological failure. Real children, terrified for their elderly mother's health, would have rushed forward in panic. Nathan and Paige didn't move an inch. Instead, their bodies stiffened, their eyes flared not with fear, but with a visceral, burning frustration so intense I could feel it from 10 feet away. Paige's jaw tightened, muttering something sharp under her breath before Nathan forced a strained expression of concern and started walking back toward me. "Step back, give her air," one paramedic instructed, lifting me onto a transport chair. As they wheeled me away toward the medical station, I watched the digital clock above the departure door tick forward. Through the glass windows, Flight 482 to Honolulu detached from the loading bridge, its heavy engines whining as it taxied toward the runway, carrying my son and daughter-in-law into the sky. The medical clinic was quiet. The nurse checked my vitals and smiled with professional reassurance. "Everything looks completely normal, Mrs. Vance. Your pulse is calm." "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," I said softly, sitting upright on the examination table. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text message from Nathan flashed across the screen. "Mom, we're boarding now. Try to rest and take care of yourself while we are away. We love you." I stared at the glowing screen for 3 long seconds, then placed the phone face down on the stainless steel tray beside me. A forensic auditor never believes in coincidences, and people who buy you luxury tickets while trying to lock you into a ghost flight are never planning a vacation. They were planning an exit strategy, and now I was too. 45 minutes after Flight 482 climbed into the gray San Diego clouds, the terminal lounge grew quiet. I was sitting by a corner window watching the ground crew pull chocks from empty aircraft when a soft click of heels approached the laminate flooring. It was Renata, her supervisor badge tucked inside her blazer pocket as her shift ended. She slipped into the vinyl seat across from me, pulled a sleek black smartphone from her coat, and slid it gently across the small coffee table. I did not touch it immediately. I looked at the black glass, then up into her tired, steady eyes. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I pressed play. The audio file opened with the faint, hollow echo of tile walls and running water. The acoustics of the women's restroom near Gate 417 recorded mere minutes before we reached the boarding lines. Then, Paige's voice cut through the tiny speaker. It was not the voice of a grateful daughter-in-law, nor the warm, polite tone she used when asking me for extra sugar in her morning coffee. It was cold, sharp, and mechanical, like a surgeon detailing a procedure on a cadaver. "The toxic capsules dissolve in plasma in under 9 minutes," Paige's recorded voice stated, entirely devoid of human hesitation. "At 35,000 feet, the symptoms match a natural cardiac arrest down to the clinical marker. Even if the pilot makes an emergency landing, all traces of the compound evaporate under cabin pressure. Once it's done, the $1,200,000 life insurance payout transfers directly into the trust ledger." A pause on the recording. Then came Nathan's voice, tight, thin, and rattling with a nervous cowardice that made my stomach curdle. "Are we sure the signature on the policy rider won't trigger an audit?" Nathan asked, his words rushing together. A sharp, cruel laugh echoed off the tiles. It was Paige, her tone dripping with absolute contempt. "The old woman thinks she's a genius with her numbers," Paige replied, her voice dropping into a venomous sneer. "Once the forged medical evaluation and the amended will are filed, no one questions a lonely old death." The recording clicked shut. For a long moment, the quiet hum of the airport ventilation system was the only sound in the booth. Another mother might have shattered right there. Another human being might have slammed their fists against the table, wept for the betrayal, or screamed out the raw injustice of a son trading his own flesh and blood for a payout. But my mind did not break. 30 years of combing through corporate fraud, untangling hidden shell companies, and exposing multi-million-dollar embezzlement schemes do something to your nervous system. When you spend your entire life treating betrayal as a balance sheet discrepancy, grief is just an inefficient emotion that gets in the way of the audit. I opened my leather planner, pulled out a fountain pen, and turned to a fresh, crisp page. I did not shed a tear. Instead, my hand moved with absolute methodical precision. I wrote down the timestamp of the recording. I wrote down the exact figure, $1,200,000. I mapped out the structural sequence of the crime as if I were reviewing an illicit ledger handed to me by an anonymous whistleblower. When I finished writing, I looked up at Renata, whose hands were still resting nervously in her lap. I said, "You did the right thing bringing this to me, Renata. Now, I need you to transfer the original raw audio file directly to this encrypted flash drive, delete it from your cloud backup entirely, and stay completely off the grid for the next 48 hours until I file the formal affidavit with federal authorities." Renata blinked, surprised by my clinical calm, but she followed my instructions without hesitation. Within 3 minutes, the data was secured, and she vanished back into the terminal crowd, leaving me alone with the open pages of my notebook. Sitting there under the harsh fluorescent lights, the entire puzzle of the last 8 months clicked into place with terrifying alignment. When Nathan lost his job last autumn and begged to move into the guest wing, it was never about temporary shelter. When they praised my cooking, offered to handle the household bills, and urged me to rest, it was never about filial care. The Hawaiian vacation was never a gift of love. It was an execution order, drafted, budgeted, and scheduled down to the minute, executed under the quiet roof of the home I had given them. The audit was no longer about missing grocery money or unpaid rent. It was about a calculated attempt to erase my life for a 7-figure balance. And as I capped my pen and closed the leather binder, I knew the books were about to be balanced permanently. The taxi dropped me off at the curb of my San Diego home just past noon. I did not step through my front door with the slumped shoulders of a broken, grieving mother. I walked in like a lead investigator stepping back into a sealed crime scene, my mind sharp, cold, and entirely methodical. The house was dead silent, carrying that hollow, suffocating echo of a place temporarily abandoned by its predators. I didn't drop my coat in the hallway. I walked straight past the living room, entered my private study, and locked the heavy oak door behind me. My fingers went straight to the biometric wall safe concealed behind the bookshelf. Inside sat a steel lockbox containing my foundational legal and financial documents. I pulled out the life insurance portfolio first. Flipping directly to the beneficiary rider, my eyes scanned the designated name block. My granddaughter's name in Boston, a bright, ambitious girl studying architecture, had been cleanly wiped away with a high-grade digital override and replaced with a single brazen entry, Nathan Vance. At a glance, the signature at the bottom corner bore a near-identical curve to my own handwriting. But 30 years of forensic auditing train your eyes to see past illusions. Under my heavy pocket magnifier, the subtle entry stroke of the capital letter E in Eleanor revealed an unnatural, jagged microfracture, the unmistakable watermark of an electronic stamp duplication, or the trembling hand of someone hastily tracing a coerced signature onto a smooth desktop. My pulse did not spike. It only ticked slower, like a well-oiled clock movement. I slid the life insurance file aside and opened my laptop, pulling up the encrypted master directory where I kept 6 months of consolidated banking and credit federation data downloaded into structured financial spreadsheets. I bypassed the surface balances and ran a specialized variance analysis script across my retirement disbursements. There were no flashing red alarms, no massive lump sum wire transfers to overseas accounts that might trigger an automated bank fraud alert. Instead, the theft was surgical, patient, and disguised as background noise. They had siphoned the funds through a network of obscure intermediary digital wallets via microtransactions. $3,400 here, $5,100 there. 4,800 tucked into automated merchant clearinghouse cycles, small enough to slip beneath the radar of standard monthly statements, but consistent enough to bleed dry. When I hit the aggregate sum total at the bottom of the column, the final figure flashed with brutal clarity. $85,500 had been systematically drained from my retirement reserves. The financial looting was only the structural foundation. buried beneath the bank statements lay an even darker betrayal. Near the bottom of the lockbox, tucked inside a plain manila folder bearing the stamp of a shady, low-rent notary public office located out in the eastern suburbs, was a general power of attorney document. It bore a notarized seal granting Nathan full, uninhibited legal control over my entire estate, real estate holdings, and liquid accounts. Clipped directly to the back of the legal instrument was a fraudulent medical evaluation report issued by an obscure private clinic across town, certifying with fabricated clinical markers that I was suffering from early-stage mild cognitive impairment and severe executive dysfunction. They weren't just planning to murder me at 30,000 feet for an insurance payout. They were legally erasing my existence from the bottom up, turning me into a ghost on paper so they could inherit my home, my savings, and my life while I was still breathing. A lesser person might have panicked, thrown the papers against the wall, or dialed the police in a hysterical frenzy. But I am Eleanor Vance. You do not fight a systemic, premeditated fraud with raw emotion. You counter it with hard, incontrovertible data and a better engineered trap. I picked up my smartphone, switching on the high-resolution macro lens, and photographed every single fraudulent signature, every bank discrepancy, every manipulated legal seal, uploading the raw image files instantly to a secure, zero-knowledge cloud vault located off-site. Then, I walked over to the smart home control panel mounted near my study door. 6 months ago, when Nathan and Paige first moved in and began pestering me about upgrading the house's security system for my forgetful elderly safety, I let them believe they were installing motion sensors and remote door locks to monitor my movements. What they never realized was that I had completely rewired the firmware backbone of the entire matrix. Every hidden lens, every smart thermostat microphone, and every digital access log was routed directly into my private, encrypted, closed-loop server. They thought they were watching a fading, senile old woman slowly lose her grip on reality inside her own home. They had no idea they had just locked themselves inside an unescapable digital cage of their own making. At midnight, while the house slept and the smart home servers hummed softly in the closet, I made a secure, encrypted call to Miriam Vance, no relation to me. Miriam was the sharpest senior asset litigation attorney I had ever worked alongside during my active decades, auditing corporate shell games. By 9 o'clock the following morning, Miriam was sitting across from me at the mahogany dining table. I slid the gathered evidence dossier across the wood, Renata's audio flash drive, the spreadsheet tracking the $85,500 in microthefts, the forged power of attorney, and the fraudulent medical clinic report diagnosing my non-existent mental decline. Miriam opened the file, her eyes scanning the pages with professional velocity. As the pieces fell into place, the color drained completely from her face, and she let out a low, breathless whisper. "Eleanor, this isn't just attempted poisoning," Miriam said, her voice shaking with a rare, cold shock as she looked up from the documents. "This is one of the most sophisticated, premeditated guardianship frauds and estate heists I have ever encountered in 30 years of practice." Without hesitation, Miriam reached into her structured leather briefcase and pulled out a clean legal pad, her pen hovering over the paper. "We need to call federal marshals and local homicide detectives right this second. We have enough evidence here to lock them away for decades without parole." I raised my hand, pouring her a fresh cup of hot black coffee, and slowly shook my head. "Not yet, Miriam," I said softly, my voice completely steady against the gravity of the room. "If we arrest them right now, they'll simply play the card of desperate debtors or claim it was an unfortunate family misunderstanding. They'll hide behind procedural loopholes and sympathetic defense lawyers. We don't just want a quick arrest. We want an airtight, systemic conviction that leaves them absolutely nowhere to run. Besides, their flight failed. I want to see what Plan B looks like when they realize their execution window just collapsed. Miriam stared at me across the table for a long, tense moment, recognizing the cold, calculating focus of a veteran forensic auditor in my eyes. Slowly, she closed her briefcase and nodded in silent agreement. For the next 4 hours, working under absolute legal confidentiality, we laid out the counter strategy. Following Miriam's expert guidance, we drafted a completely new, ironclad trust structure and final will, legally filed and witnessed under emergency protocols, that superseded any prior documents. We deliberately left my primary checking accounts active, applying a silent bank monitoring flag rather than an immediate freeze, ensuring that any further attempts at draining my assets would be tracked in real time without tipping our hand. We also reviewed every security node of the smart home matrix to ensure their every move inside the house was fully cataloged. By noon, Miriam packed her files and slipped out the side exit, leaving me alone in the house just as the crunch of gravel signaled an incoming vehicle in the driveway. Flight 482 had landed hours ago. Nathan and Paige were back. I stood up from the dining table, taking a slow, shuffling breath. I reached up, slightly loosening my posture, letting my shoulders round and my expression soften into the vacant, unfocused stare of an aging woman struggling with her memory. The transformation required no acting school. It was simply stepping back into the exact costume they expected me to wear. The front door unlocked with a sharp click, and Nathan and Paige stepped into the foyer. Their faces were a mask of high-tension fatigue, their eyes wild with an underlying panic they were desperately trying to swallow. When they saw me standing quietly by the kitchen counter, holding a half-empty mug of tea, their expressions locked in a bizarre, frozen tableau of shock and imported relief. "Mom! Oh, thank God you're okay," Nathan stammered, rushing forward with a theatrical burst of affection, though his hands hovered awkwardly, afraid to actually touch me. "We heard there was some kind of medical scare at the gate right after we left. We were frantic the entire flight." Paige stepped in right behind him, her smile stretched thin and tight across her face like dried leather. "We were worried sick, Eleanor. You really shouldn't be left alone. Your memory has been so fragile lately." I looked at them through half-lidded eyes, letting out a faint, tremulous sigh, as if I were only half present. "Oh? Did you get back safely?" I asked, my voice wavering just enough to sell the illusion. "I felt a bit dizzy at the airport. Everything is just getting so blurry lately." Paige's eyes flared with a fleeting, venomous flicker of disappointment before she instantly masked it with a sympathetic nod. Nathan forced a tight, reassuring chuckle, exchanging a dark, knowing glance with his wife. They thought I was a fading old woman, slipping further into cognitive darkness, while they engineered my demise. They had no idea they had just walked straight back into a lion's den, and the final audit had already begun. For the next 2 weeks, I completely surrendered my daily routine to the role of the frail, disoriented grandmother Paige had so neatly mapped out in her fraudulent medical dossiers. It wasn't a difficult performance. Forensic auditing teaches you that when you are hunting a high-level corporate fraudster, you never tip your hand by showing early aggression. You let them believe they are winning every round. You let their own blind overconfidence encourage them to commit their crimes right out in the open, letting the walls close in around them naturally without a single sign of resistance or panic. Every single morning, I played my part down to the finest detail. I would sit quietly at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that grew stone cold while I let it sit untouched, pretending to forget what day of the week it was or why I had walked into a room. I willingly took the small, innocuous capsules they left by my bedside, though they never knew I had replaced their suspicious contents with harmless vitamin supplements weeks prior, safely locking their original chemical formulations away in my biometric safe. Paige and Nathan were thoroughly convinced my mind was collapsing under the pressure. Through the hidden audio matrix wired directly into the dining room vents, I listened to them gloat in the dark of midnight, their whispers dripping with toxic satisfaction. Plan A fell apart because the old woman caught a lucky break at the departure gate, Paige's voice hissed quietly from the speaker, sharp and calculating. We shift directly to Plan B, declare her legally incompetent, force the emergency guardianship papers through probate before the bank uncovers the missing $85,500, and clean out the estate before anyone asks questions. Nathan's nervous chuckle followed, completely stripped of any human warmth or familial affection. She's practically doing the work for us. Her memory is completely gone. They were so eager to seal their victory that they rushed their timeline into high gear. To execute Plan B, they needed a formal legal certification of mental incapacity. 3 days later, a smooth-talking, impeccably dressed private psychiatrist recommended by Paige's shady medical contacts arrived at our front door with a clipboard and a stack of standardized cognitive test sheets. At the same time, Nathan had spent the prior evening manipulating 2 of our immediate neighbors into signing brief affidavits, claiming they had seen me wandering down the suburban sidewalk in my nightgown late at night, completely lost. I decided to feed the fire. In forensic auditing, we call it supplying corrupted data to a suspect just to watch them sign off on their own downfall. During the mandatory psychiatric evaluation at my kitchen table, with Nathan and Paige hovering anxiously in the background like vultures waiting for a carcass to cool, the doctor asked me standard orientation questions. What year was it? Who was the president? What month did we experience last? I played my part to absolute perfection. I furrowed my brow, hesitated, and deliberately gave completely wrong answers, stumbling over simple dates and looking around with a vacant, frightened expression. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Paige's jaw slacken into a triumphant, predatory smile, while Nathan let out a barely suppressed sigh of pure financial relief. The doctor duly noted every fabricated failure, signing off on an immediate emergency clinical assessment certifying that I was suffering from advanced cognitive decline and was wholly incapable of managing my own legal or financial affairs. Within 48 hours, Nathan filed the emergency guardianship petition with the San Diego Family Court, attaching the forged medical evaluation, the falsified neighbor affidavits, and the power of attorney documents. They stood before the clerk believing they had crossed the finish line, completely unaware that every single fraudulent document they submitted had been mirrored, time-stamped, and routed directly into Miriam Vance's legal dossier. They thought they had legally erased my mind and stolen my life. They didn't realize they had just handed the state prosecutor a signed, undeniable confession on a silver platter. Furthermore, as I watched them pack the court filings into their briefcase from my hallway camera feed, I knew the final trap was fully sprung. Every false testimony, every fabricated medical milestone, and every manipulated signature was securely cataloged in our encrypted database. They had written their own indictment under the guise of saving me, transforming a simple family dispute into an airtight federal case of grand larceny and systemic guardianship fraud that would soon collapse their entire world in a single decisive stroke. The books were balanced, the ledger was locked, and the final penalty was about to be assessed upon them without mercy. Every hidden camera in the hallways recorded their triumphant grins, capturing every arrogant declaration as they celebrated what they believed was an unmitigated victory. They truly thought they had outsmarted a lifetime forensic expert, walking blindfolded right into the center of a federal trap from which there was no escape. The ink on Nathan's emergency guardianship petition was barely dry in the clerk's office at the San Diego Family Court before our sophisticated counter strategy was unleashed across the entire legal and financial grid, dismantling every single pillar of their elaborate scheme piece by piece without warning. In forensic auditing, you learn that arrogance is always the ultimate vulnerability. When high-level fraudsters believe they have successfully backed you into a helpless corner, they drop all their institutional defenses, rushing forward blindly to claim their prize without ever checking their blind spots. Nathan and Paige had sprinted straight across the finish line of their own trap, handing us every single piece of manufactured evidence they thought would bury me forever. Now it was time to spring the final audit and settle every ledger balance without a single ounce of hesitation or mercy. 2 days before the preliminary probate hearing, following a formal emergency motion by Miriam under strict court provisions for an independent clinical review, I found myself sitting in a sleek, sunlit consulting office downtown across from Dr. Annika Ralph, one of the most respected and rigorous forensic psychiatrists in the entire state of California. There were no hidden cameras, no coached medical examiners, and no rushed evaluations designed to suit a criminal narrative. For 3 exhaustive hours, Dr. Ralph put me through rigorous cognitive mapping, advanced logical reasoning benchmarks, spatial orientation challenges, and complex linguistic recall testing. When the final assessment was generated and signed, the conclusions were absolute and undeniable. Dr. Ralph's official report stated clearly that my cognitive faculties, analytical processing speed, and executive reasoning were not only fully intact, but sharply superior to the average baseline for someone half my age. There was zero pathology, zero degeneration, and zero mental impairment of any kind whatsoever, completely shattering their fraudulent medical narrative once and for all. While Dr. Ralph's comprehensive evaluation was being electronically stamped and uploaded directly into the court's secure master docket, Miriam was executing the financial endgame across our corporate and personal banking network with absolute surgical precision. Under strict federal fraud protocols, Miriam formally revoked the forged power of attorney documents across every major financial institution holding our estate assets. She activated the silent federal monitoring flags we had prepared weeks prior, instantly freezing any outbound wire transfers, sweeping automated clearinghouse movements, and digital login credentials associated with Nathan or Paige's secondary devices, effectively cutting off every single escape route they thought they had secured. The climax arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, just as the morning sunlight spilled across the living room hardwood floors. I was sitting quietly by the kitchen island, sipping a warm cup of herbal tea, when Nathan's sleek executive laptop sitting on the mahogany desk in the living room suddenly let out a sharp, frantic series of automated chime alerts. The screen flashed a high-priority red security warning from the banking network's specialized fraud prevention division. Within seconds, I heard Nathan bolt down the hallway stairs, his bare feet slapping wildly against the floorboards as he scrambled toward the desk. His face was a mask of cold panic as he hammered his fingers against the trackpad, reading the bold, inescapable notification glaring back at him from the display. "Paige, get down here right now!" Nathan's voice cracked, pitched an octave higher with sheer, unadulterated terror as he stared at the glowing monitor. "The accounts, all of them, they're locked. The bank is flagging federal identity theft and forged authorizations on every single routing number." Paige skidded into the living room, her bathrobe half-tied, her face instantly draining of every trace of color as she leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes darted across the text, reading the chilling words that signaled their entire financial empire had just evaporated into thin air. "That's impossible!" Paige whispered, her voice trembling violently as reality finally crashed down around them. I didn't turn around from the kitchen island. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, letting the heavy silence of the room speak volumes. Their plan B hadn't just collapsed, it had detonated right in their hands. Every single fraudulent document, every corrupted signature, and every greedy maneuver they had attempted had transformed into the exact instrument of their own destruction. The audit was complete. The trap was sealed, and the final chapter of their deception had reached its definitive, irreversible end. Every hidden camera captured the exact moment their world fell apart under the weight of their own crimes, proving once and for all that you can never outrun a properly conducted financial and legal audit. Panic has a very specific sound and shape when it finally catches up to desperate people. For months, Nathan and Paige had operated under the intoxicating delusion that they were the masterminds of their own little empire, believing they could outsmart the law, manipulate the courts, and rewrite my life history with a few forged signatures and a handful of toxic threats. But when a criminal realizes the legal net is not just closing, but tightening with the unyielding force of a steel trap, their carefully constructed facade instantly crumbles into raw, animalistic survival instinct. That survival instinct, as predictable as clockwork, always leads directly to self-destruction and frantic attempts to erase the past before the authorities arrive to seal their fate permanently. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the morning when the motion sensors in my downstairs study triggered a silent, high-definition alert on my private tablet device. The house was pitch black, wrapped in the heavy, suffocating silence of a suburban night. But through the glowing display, the reality of their desperation was blindingly clear. Nathan was sitting at the mahogany executive desk, his face bathed in the sickly blue light of his monitor, his fingers hammering frantically against the keyboard. He was desperately deleting thousands of emails, encrypted chat logs, and digital correspondence exchanged with the shady underground vendor who had supplied the slow-acting neurotoxins and chemical compounds meant to permanently silence me before the probate hearing ever commenced. Just a few feet away, in the adjacent corner of the room, Paige was frantically operating a heavy-duty corporate paper shredder. The mechanical roar of the blades chewing through ream after ream of physical documentation filled the room with a rhythmic, violent grinding noise. She was frantically feeding the shredder stacks of bank statements, credit union notices, and offshore ledger printouts that documented the catastrophic reality they had tried so hard to conceal. Nathan's staggering, insurmountable personal gambling debt totaling precisely $142,000. That specific, ruinous financial black hole was the true engine driving their entire scheme, the desperate debt that had forced them to target my life savings in the first place. As the shredder whirred and Nathan hammered away at his hard drives, the crushing weight of their impending doom finally fractured their fragile alliance, turning them against each other in a vicious, venomous shouting match. Through the crystal-clear audio feed of the hidden recording array, every single frantic accusation and desperate recrimination echoed directly into my study with chilling clarity. "Why the hell did you tell me the poison wouldn't leave a trace in the blood work?" Nathan snarled, his voice pitched high with hysteria as he glared across the room at his wife. "You swore the coroner would rule it natural heart failure." Paige stopped feeding the shredder, her face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage as she pointed a shaking finger right back at his face. "Don't you dare put this on me, Nathan. You're the one drowning in $142,000 of illegal gambling debt. You dragged me into this mess, and your reckless stupidity is the only reason we are even trapped in this corner."
Every single second of their frantic data wiping, every strip of shredded paper, and every venomous word of their mutual betrayal was being captured, encrypted, and automatically synchronized to my secure off-site cloud storage vault. They believed they were erasing the evidence of their crimes, but in reality, they were simply creating the most airtight, self-incriminating prosecution package imaginable for the courts to review. The final chapter of their deception did not begin with a whispered warning or a polite knock on the front door. It arrived with the cold, unyielding mechanics of the American judicial system. The following morning, just as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed against the front door. Through the entryway peephole, I watched Nathan, still wearing the rumpled clothes from his frantic midnight shredding session, pull the door open with a nervous, exhausted twitch in his eye. Standing on the porch was a professional process server, his expression entirely neutral, holding a thick, heavy manila envelope that looked like an anchor weighing down the entire morning. Without saying a single word, the server thrust the 52-page legal dossier straight into Nathan's trembling hands. It was the complete civil and criminal indictment meticulously assembled by Miriam. Every count of document forgery, financial fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil liberties, and premeditated attempted murder was laid out in terrifying, indisputable detail across those 52 pages. Nathan stood frozen in the doorway, staring down at the indictment that signaled the absolute end of their illusion, while Paige peered from behind his shoulder, watching their entire world collapse into absolute ruin. Every trap they had laid for me had finally snapped shut on them, leaving them with nowhere left to run.
The grand courtroom of the San Diego Superior Court was bathed in the pale, indifferent light of a Tuesday morning, exactly 8 months to the day since Flight 417 had set this entire reckoning into motion. From where I sat quietly in the front row, the atmosphere felt less like a theater of vengeance and more like a sterile operating room where a malignant tumor was finally being excised with absolute precision. There were no dramatic outbursts from the defense table, no theatrical pleas for mercy, and no escape routes left unblocked. Miriam had constructed an ironclad judicial fortress, and as the trial proceeded, every single pillar of Nathan and Paige's elaborate deception was systematically dismantled before the eyes of the judge and jury. The testimony unspooled like a slow-motion car crash of their own making. First, Renata took the witness stand, her voice steady and clear as she recounted the exact chilling warning she had whispered to me at the airport gate months ago, exposing the deep-rooted malice behind their facade. Next came the state's lead handwriting and document authentication expert, whose digital analysis projector lit up the courtroom walls with high-definition overlays of forged signatures, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that every single power of attorney document had been systematically falsified. The financial ledger then laid bare the ugly truth in cold, hard numbers. The prosecution projected the itemized bank records onto the main screens, highlighting the unauthorized wire transfers and tracing the exact movement of the $85,500 they had drained from my secondary accounts. But the absolute breaking point of service, the moment the air seemed to be completely sucked out of the courtroom, arrived when the digital evidence exhibits were played. The courtroom speakers crackled to life, broadcasting the pristine, crystal-clear audio recording of Nathan and Paige frantically arguing in their living room at 2 in the morning, bickering over the purchase of chemical neurotoxins and desperately trying to assign blame for Nathan's catastrophic gambling debts. Immediately following the audio, the high-definition security footage played on every monitor, Nathan frantically wiping hard drives while Paige mechanically shoved reams of incriminating bank statements into a roaring industrial paper shredder. Nathan finally slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, completely stripped of the arrogant bravado he had worn like armor for decades.
Beside him, Paige wept uncontrollably into her palms, her sobs echoing hollowly against the oak panels, as the state medical board formally submitted the paperwork to revoke her medical license permanently, stripping away her career in absolute disgrace. The verdict, when it finally arrived, was swift and absolute. The judicial panel delivered severe prison sentences for organized financial fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy to commit premeditated murder, ensuring that their greed would be repaid behind steel bars. Today, the heavy oak front door of my home is fitted with entirely new locks, and the haunting echoes of their betrayal have long since faded into the quiet hum of suburban peace. I converted Nathan's old upstairs bedroom into a sunlit reading library, filling the shelves with thick volumes of forensic accounting and legal history. The revised last will and testament I signed last autumn permanently redirects every cent of my estate into the newly established Lantern Science Scholarship Fund, dedicated to supporting brilliant first-generation college students pursuing degrees in chemistry and forensic auditing. Today, standing before a packed lecture hall at the university downtown 1 year later, looking out at hundreds of bright, eager faces, I picked up a piece of white chalk and wrote 3 simple rules across the blackboard. Always verify the data, trust empirical evidence over emotional loyalty, and when the truth demands it, have the profound courage to shatter your own illusions. Loving your children does not mean enabling their corruption. Sometimes drawing a hard, unyielding ethical boundary is the only way to save your soul and preserve your dignity to the very end.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.